Well, hi everyone, and welcome back to Pushing the Limits. Today, I have the amazing Dr. Dave Jenkins with me, who has had a bit of a drama this week. Dave, tell us a little bit what's going on in your world.
We live in a beach called Makarori, a little outpost of Gisborne on the east coast. And after 8 days of rain, we noticed that the door wasn't. We woke up and the door handle wasn't closed. The doors weren't closing properly. And sure enough, the house had started slipping down the kind of incline. It wasn't really too much of it, but apparently 6 houses around us all had the same thing, and we've just been red stickered and had to get out of the house very quickly. So I'm looking around. Fortunately, a friend of mine's beach house batch that they rent out was free, so we're now in their place.
Oh man.
Yeah, chaos ensues. So yes.
Yeah. I'm sorry about that. And despite that, you've turned up for the podcast today, which is really impressive. So thank you, because you're obviously your world's about to turn upside down trying to sort that mess out, I should imagine. So that you're still dedicated to your actual cause and what we're here to talk about today. So all the best to you, Mickey. Hopefully the insurance company will put things right, I hope.
We're hoping.
We hope so. So Dr. Dave Jenkins, see, you have, I had Dr. Dale Bredeson on the podcast was it last week? Yeah, last week. And of course, he is the expert on Alzheimer's, and you and Mickey have published with him together on a paper. And so, and you're in New Zealand and you're trained in the Bredeson Protocol. And so I wanted to share your experiences and then also touch on some of the studies that you're doing in your area and, dive into all of this stuff about Alzheimer's, but also we want to go and explore the concepts around metabolic health and pre-diabetes and diabetes and what you see there. So Dave, can you just give us a little bit of your background and how did you get to be involved with this area of medicine?
Okay, so I'm qualified from Otago Medical School. I had a large general practice in Edgecombe, Bay of Plenty, but I got very interested in training and ended up at Auckland Medical School postgraduate, learning about how to do good training for nurses and doctors, especially rural nurses and doctors. And then, long story short, I went surfing to a group of islands called the Mentawai, which is the Disneyland of surfing off Indonesia.
Yep.
And found a lot of children dying right near where my luxury charter boat was, and so I started an aid organization called Surfaid. That was 21 years ago.
Wow.
And that's been very successful. And we now have about 90 staff operating in 4 countries. Our biggest donor is the New Zealand government. So, so that really began my interest in, a lot of children were dying just because their mums didn't have some essential knowledge and essential practices like exclusive breastfeeding or a mosquito net or boiling the water before they drink it. Just real basic stuff. And it started my interest in, one is, how do you help communities change their fundamental health behaviors? And that's been a 20-year journey.
Wow.
And I was very lucky to be given a social entrepreneur award and part of that was called the Rainer Arnold Fellowship. They asked the real tough question, well, how do you design a model with the different parts working very eloquently together to get maximum impact for your return on your investment? So we had this return on investment strategy, and it's been very, very successful. So I was kind of always wanted to set up an aid organization run by the local people, and now we don't have any kind of white people coming in on a white horse saving the day. It wasn't like that. It was very much grounds up, bottom up, community driven. And now we don't have any expat staff in Indonesia. I'm still involved, keeping, helping where I can. But so then I started saying, oh, well, what do I do now? That was been an incredible journey. And I started studying functional medicine, this medicine of how to reverse disease. And one look at our Western health stats, we all know.
Yeah.
I just read another one. By 2030, 85% of Americans will be obese. 85%
Wow.
at the
That's
current
horrific.
rate of.
Yeah.
So, and then my siblings said while I was in remote islands on Indonesia doing malaria programs and things, you better come home. Mum's not well. She's forgetting everything. So it turned out Mum had, early Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been studying functional medicine. I thought, well, I'll go out there into the world literature and see if there's anything I can do to help my mum.
Yeah.
And I found Dale Bredeson's first publication.
Mm-hmm.
So I emailed him, and he got back to me and said, look, come over and I'll train you.
Wow.
And that was sort of, what was that, 6 years ago now?
Yep.
And we've been over twice and worked along with Dale and kind of been, Mickey and I have kind of been the lead practitioners in New Zealand and in Australia as well. So we see a lot of Australian people, see people from Italy and Singapore and Hong Kong and other at times, but mainly it's New Zealand and Australia.
Yeah, and I was super excited to find somebody who's versed in the Bredeson Protocol here because, obviously done quite a lot of podcasts around brain health and Alzheimer's and dementia and have a vested interest with my mum having this. So to find someone that's doing it in New Zealand was like, yay, finally we've got somebody here doing something. So carry on your story.
So that's been we've been doing the Bredeson Protocol. At one stage we were doing it full time, and then during COVID we decided to come back to New Zealand, leave Indonesia, and a friend of mine said, they could really help do with your experience the iwi here, Ngāti Pro iwi. And he made an introduction, and long story short, I ended up being a GP again after a long period of not being, but also being their wellness director. So we were looking, and we have run pilot programs both for the Ngāti Pro iwi and the Turanga Health iwi in reversing prediabetes and diabetes using a lifestyle approach that we can talk about in detail. But both those pilots have just in the process of finishing, and they've been very successful. We've had a lot of success in reversing diabetes, bringing people off medication and giving them a lot more energy and improvement in quality of life. And they will get a huge increase in their life expectancy as well.
This is amazing.
So now we're just asking the question, well, how do we scale this up so that we can make this offer available for at least the 25% of early adopters? It does involve a major shift away from current kind of mainstream eating practices.
Yes.
So lower carbohydrates, some intermittent fasting, but also looking at things like stress and sleep and those things that affect your blood glucose levels that get forgotten about, and the timing of movement and exercise, the timing of things according to our circadian rhythm.
Yep.
So we've delved into all of that science, which does run parallel to the Bredeson Protocol and the functional approach, and the what we call the ketotarian diet, which is what we recommend, which is not all meat, bacon, and cheese.
No,
but it's still keto.
Yes.
And, we're not doing strict keto for the reverse diabetes, although people that can do it. We teach them how to do it. But it's definitely a lower carbohydrates, so getting below 125 grams a day, preferably below 100 grams.
Well, that's still quite high. Yeah, that's still
relatively so we're
high.
still getting good results at that, and we think that's doable. And certainly in the first stages, and then bring people onto the keto diet in the second stage of their development. Because what tends to happen is people get very interested.
Yep.
They're kind of going along, doing what everyone else did, eating their processed foods and their bread
getting
and flour.
fatter and unhealthier.
And just doing what everyone's doing, mainstream, right? But this really sparks them up and thinks, gee, I didn't know the mechanisms of how this occurs, which we teach them about insulin receptors, just the basics with pictures. And they go, wow, no one ever taught us why I had diabetes.
No, I know.
I said,
It's just like mind-blowing, isn't it?
No one ever told us.
Yeah.
And they said, I can have my wheat bix and I can have my fruit.
Oh.
And so once you sit them down and walk them through why they can't lose fat because insulin's stopping the lipase fat burning enzyme, and they go, really, I've started to lose all my fat. Yep, because your insulin's dropping, and it all makes sense. And when they start to get results, and then they get excited, and then they go, wow, so you mean, and then people around them get excited. So we document. One of the questions we ask them is, how many of your whānau have started to make healthier behavior changes just from you? And it's always a significant amount. One of our patients told me the other day, oh, my husband's 80 kilograms again. He hasn't been that since high school.
Wow. Amazing.
And so that's what we're looking at, is asking those questions. How can we just put fuel under the scaling process, this viral spread of healthy behaviors? And there are real barriers to it, as you know. Vegetables.
Yeah, they're so expensive.
Cauliflower, $6, $7, $8. And cauliflower rice is something that people love to have instead of rice. So, we're looking with the iwis about teaching how to grow food. And that's what it comes down to. If you want to be healthy and you want it to be affordable, if you don't have enough money to buy out decent vegetables, grow them.
Yep.
And this is fun
going back to basics. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's a real wholesome thing to do. Wholesome for the family, wholesome for your children to watch things grow and to nurture things and then to eat healthy food.
Yeah.
So I think ultimately it will get down to back to the old thing. I mean, I grew up with a veggie garden. Everyone had a veggie garden. And almost no one has a veggie garden now. Although, so we're getting of an age where the people, my friends, are starting to retire. They're putting in veggie gardens. So they can have organic veggies. So, but it has
I think a lot of us are definitely, I grew up with a dad who had a huge organic veggie garden, and he was always the one in charge of that for us. And we always had beautiful food, and he would go fishing and hunting, and had a couple of sheep and a couple of cows, on our little plot there when we grew up. And we were lucky because we had access to that. And, my dad passed away 2.5 years ago, and I'm like, damn, I didn't learn enough from Dad, like how do we go hunting? How do we go fishing? How do we, he taught us as kids, but we've, moved on and forgotten, and having to actually go back and try to teach yourself. And when you go to the supermarket, you see the price of things, it's horrific. And this is where we're getting like this epidemic of obesity, and obesity leads to, all of these things, the metabolic dysregulation, the pre-diabetes and insulin resistance, the diabetes, and the diabetes is then the gateway to hell. That's what I call it, the gateway to hell, because that's where the Alzheimer's, the cancers, the heart disease, all of those age-related and obesity-related illnesses, chronic illnesses that our medical system really doesn't do well with the chronic sort of stuff. And what you're doing is really in the trenches. Like, this is really getting down to behavioral change and getting people to go from a very high carb diet. And let's be honest, it's cheaper. It's what everybody's doing. It's what all the advertising is pushing at you every day. Eat your wheat bix, your Nutrigrains, your things that you're apparently healthy. And yet we've got people with, massive problems now, and we're getting, well, when you and I grew up, when we were kids, in the 70s, there wasn't many people that were overweight. There were the odd one. And now, like you say, it's just, epidemic. And this is leading to all of these other things. And so, what you're doing, and you're reversing diabetes. Now, in my little practice, what I do here, I've helped people reverse their diabetes. It's not rocket science.
No.
It just takes education. And, like I had one recently, he's been a diabetic, diagnosed like something like 15 years ago. No one ever took the time to explain all that stuff that you just mentioned there about insulin resistance and how the body, what happens when you have high blood sugars and how it affects your cells and how it leads to all of those other diseases. And when they understand that, and then they go, right, oh my God. And then it's a process of ongoing education as you get them to lower the carb levels. And you don't go cold turkey necessarily straight out of the gate, like you said, because you have to transition their body into this new way. And it doesn't even require you go full keto sometimes, like you said.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't require that. You just got to get that insulin receptor working again, lock and key thing, and the lock has been, the insulin receptor on all our cells actually changes shape. Molecularly, they can tell. So you've got this thing, you got the lock in there and it won't open the door.
Right.
So it can't get the receptor to work. The glucose can't get into the cell, so it builds up. And what I say to my patients is it builds up. And now you've got a situation where your body's got too much sugar in the blood. So it says, okay, I better store that for a rainy day or a cold.
Good to go.
Yes, so we explain to patients about the insulin receptor being that it actually changes shape and the key won't open it anymore. So now you get into a situation where blood sugar won't get into the cells, it's in the blood, and the body just stores that for fat because it thinks, we've got caveman DNA. And we store that as fat, but also we've got 3 trillion cells which aren't getting sugar, glucose, we're not getting energy. So what does it do? What are 3 trillion cells? It sends message to the brain, hey, eat, because I am starving down here. Eat. So now you've got this vicious cycle that anyone who's been overweight experiences. They experience this hunger and then a crash after a high carb meal and feeling sick, and the only way to eat is a chocolate bar, and then I feel a bit better. So they're in a vicious cycle. So I think what's important, it is education, but it's how you deliver the education, it turns out, is really important. And we're dealing with 2 Māori iwi, and so there's specific ways we're learning how to do that. But it has to be, knowledge has to be married with a change process, right? They have to go hand in hand. If you go into any coronary care unit in New Zealand, you'll find people who've had a heart attack who have smoked, knowing smoking was wrong, right? So it's not just knowledge. Knowledge is not enough.
No.
You have to have knowledge and a behavior change process, and then part of that behavior change process is a personalization.
Yep.
So that's where we're getting, we have a huge need now for health coaches and how to, one of the questions, I just wrote the report for the iwi, how do we train, to scale us up, how do we train kaiwhinas, like health, who will act as health coaches, but in the local context, within a Māori health framework? It's a big question. I think we do have some answers, but it's definitely one of those things we're going to need to do to scale this up.
Yeah. Have you talked to, I've just comes to mind, Professor Grant Schofield?
Oh, yes. Yeah. No, I was meant to speak at their reverse conference, but I couldn't do that. I was going to about reversing Alzheimer's.
Yep.
But yeah, there is a good group of people, but it's a tiny group, right?
Yeah.
Compared to
the massive need.
Yeah, what we need to do to influence the government.
Yeah.
To kind of get the support. I mean, on paper, now there is genuine response in thinking and in strategy to reversing diabetes and pre-diabetes, but there's some research grants. So Grant Schofield, he's got a research grant looking into it, but we're beyond need to look into it.
Yeah, we know how it works.
We have results from New Zealand, Australia, England, America. GP David Unwin's been reversing diabetes for years and has published hundreds of cases.
Wow.
And we've got the Verta Health model in America. So that's a totally online virtual program. The person can reverse their diabetes from their living room.
Wow. That's cool.
So we're looking into that model and how to bring it into the Te Māori health approach. So there's a lot of questions around now, but it's going to get down to government support.
Yep.
You know, a lot of us in this field just shake our head and go, how can that documented problem of obesity and diabetes and all that goes with it be such a prevailing disease, and the future of it looks really dismal, and the cost of it on the taxpayer? So Price Waterhouse just did a study with Otago University. So the average diabetic costs the taxpayer $550,000 in a lifetime.
Wow. Jeez.
Yeah. So
it doesn't surprise me at all.
You know, it only costs a few $1,000s to go through a reversal program if we can get them at the pre-diabetes level.
But what is it that with prevention? Like, we just don't do prevention. You know, like I'm working with so Dr. Elizabeth Harris, she's trying to get a post-concussion, you know, like looking at people who've had concussions, getting them into a program so that we can start to protect them from the get-go and be proactive in rehabilitating their brains instead of waiting until they've got some major issues and just waiting and seeing approach, which is most of the approach at the moment. And just, you know, like you're just pushing the proverbial uphill, you know. There's just no, and I don't know why there's this inertia. I mean, with the diabetes and things, is it coming from the big food industry? Are they pushing back? Or lobbying? I don't know.
You have to look, go out and look in, right from the outside. And yeah, follow the money will get you a long way down the answer of how did we get here? Some bad science that was, you know, the Dr. Keys, and that was promoted by food companies, especially, you know, Kellogg's, and I totally go back through the history. You'll see, you can name names. It's all there, and so the food companies promoted this low fat, you know, high carbohydrate diet that most people eat now, or most people. The trouble is most people eat high fat, high carb.
Yeah, both is high.
Huge calorie. I mean, they're doing the worst of the worst. And so, that was allowed to propagate without decent government scrutiny, without the scientists were saying this is wrong, took years. And so we're still there. We're still there where people think that their eggs are going to kill them of a heart attack.
Yeah,
and you know,
the good things like eggs, and then but eat your cereals, you know, your high grains, high sugar cereals, and then they're fortified with iron or something ridiculous, you know, like and promoted by nutritionists on television.
The other thing is that I think there's a couple of other big factors is that and our the medical situation is that we are not rewarded or encouraged to take on lifestyle medicine, behavior change, reversal program. We get 15 minutes to see a patient, and I cannot reverse diabetes with 15 minutes.
No.
I can diagnose it and I can treat it with drugs and I can monitor it, but you know, it takes longer than that. So in my toolbox of the average GP is drugs. Now, there are some things where that's changing a little bit. And like I say, we've started to work in our clinic. We now have someone training as a health coach. And I think a lot of clinics now do have health coaches, and that's a major, major improvement. But medical orthodoxy, quite rightly, in some ways, we're very conservative. And the only people that have got money to do these stage 3 trials are drug companies. It's rare. It does happen, but it's rare to get trials up and running to stage 3 without drug company. So you have the situation where the only proof of therapeutic effect is from drugs. So that's the only thing we have, or surgery, and it's the only thing we have in our toolbox. And that's where the money is, of course.
Yep. And this is you know, like just systemic problems. But let's go and actually have a look at some of the implications for this. Like, so, you know, if we go back to the Alzheimer's story with Dr. Dave Bredeson and the protocol, like, you know, he's got people now who are the first survivors of Alzheimer's. Now, why is Alzheimer's related to diabetes and insulin resistance and obesity? Explain that to people, because a lot of people don't even connect those two dots, that this leads to an increased risk and cancer and cardiovascular disease, by the way. You know, all of these things are increased risk. So yeah, talk to us a little bit about your work with some of the Alzheimer's patients and being able to reverse Alzheimer's, and you know, share a little bit of that study and stuff that you did with Dale.
Yeah, so after training with Dale, we began to see it got around quite quickly. You know, he wrote 2 books, and people wanted to know, what is this Bredeson Protocol? So we got contacted a lot, and we've developed a system for patients. And what we do is just what he basically have taught, is look at the multitude of factors called perturbations that are impacting on the brain, that are causing the brain to be inflamed. So inflammation is part of it. Insulin resistance in the brain, so the brain cells aren't getting energy. And then toxicities as well. Those would be the 3 major things.
Yep.
And so you therefore break that up. Let's look at inflammation. Why is someone inflamed? Well, when someone's overweight, they produce too many inflammagens, so they get inflamed. Or they may have problems in their gut. So they have what's called leaky gut. So most of us aren't eating enough fiber, or we've had too many antibiotics in our life. And then we get a leaky brain. So when we get a leaky gut, we get a leaky brain, meaning those things the brain was able to keep out of the brain, things like mercury and mold spores, are now getting in through the holes and inflaming the brain. So we're getting this gut-brain axis. It's huge. And not only in Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease now, which is actually rapidly growing in its incidence.
Yep.
And so we've got to look at the gut. So we do leaky gut tests and ask the question, what's wrong with your gut and how can we help you improve it? So gut inflammation, insulin resistance, as you know, if you're diabetics, you're 3 times likely to get Alzheimer's disease. So you've got, even if you don't have diabetes, the disease process of Alzheimer's causes insulin resistance in the brain. So now the brain cells aren't getting glucose. So you have to, they're starved. And so when starved brain cells, they go into stress and they start to die, basically.
Yep.
You know, and retract, yes. So we have to look at all of those issues, and then we run some usually do toxin screens to see if there's toxicity.
Yep.
And we've found in New Zealand and Australia that mold is a very common cause. And there's a particular pattern of people who come with mold. And it's linked to mercury, and we've talked to other practitioners as well. People have, you know, like in the tropics and remote places, they have mold, it's moist, but they don't get these mold illnesses, and it's somehow linked to perhaps the amalgams that we put in our teeth.
Okay.
There's some combination of mercury and mold together, whether we're not quite sure how it works, but we always see, I can't think of a case where we've had mold illness without a a mercury being involved.
Wow.
There
Okay.
may
So it
be,
seems to be
yeah,
combined.
they combine.
Mm.
And maybe they're overstretching our detox system. The people that get into trouble often have the MTFR
Yep.
genes, so we know that they don't detox very well.
Yep.
And so it might be those people are the ones that are getting into trouble.
Also, the GST family of genes, look into those ones, the GST T1, P1, and M1. They're a big major factor too in that detoxification process, you know, alongside the methylation genes.
Yeah, so we're looking at inflammatory pathways, toxin pathways, genetic pathways, the gut, and then common things. And you'd be surprised, like vitamin D, you know, how many people are low or normal in vitamin D, the sunshine molecule. And there are millions of receptors on brain cells for vitamin D and it locks in and actually changes the DNA, changes the genetic expression.
Wow. Okay. I didn't know that. That's a new one. You know, I know vitamin D does literally 1,000 different things in the body, but that's actually in the brain receptors.
Yep. They have brain receptors for vitamin D. And what people don't realize is it's not a vitamin, it's a neuropeptide. It acts like a hormone. One of the ways it works. And so simple lifestyle things like that, you know, we about 75% of us will be vitamin D
deficient,
either deficient or almost deficient by springtime, getting through winter. And you talk to people,
it's so cheap and easy to do, like
but you do have to make an effort. Like wintertime, you have to make a real effort between 11 and 2 o'clock to get out into that sun with your shirt off and your white paley legs. I was throwing a frisbee on the beach the other day. We were laughing because we had a nice warm sunny day and we're throwing a frisbee around on the beach and look down, look how white my legs are. You have to make an effort, and it's better from the sun rather than a supplement.
Yes, although, you know, like I think like there's genetic factors in there too, and a lot of people, you know, I had a discussion with Dr. David Minkoff a while back, and he's a doctor in Florida, who's tested everybody for glyphosate, so Roundup, you know, poisoning for the last 30 years. And his theory, or one of his theories, is that because he's constantly seeing people with vitamin D deficiencies, and they live in Florida. He lives in Florida. He's an Ironman athlete. He was deficient in vitamin D, and he's like, what the heck's going on here? I've got enough sunshine. That's not the problem. And there's you know, the genetic receptors, there's three different things, but beyond that, he believes that glyphosate may be playing a role here in blocking the conversion of the inactive to the active form of vitamin D. He hasn't got conclusive proof of that, but there's something in the environment that even when we're getting the sunshine is stopping people converting into that active form. So, and I also think, like, I import a high dose vitamin D3 plus K2 supplement into my range, and you know, like vitamin D3 is available in every street corner, but it doesn't often have K2 in it, the MK7 version of that, and I believe that we're really needing to be looking at the 5,000 to 10,000 IU range, getting yourself tested, being under a doctor, all of that sort of stuff. But that higher dose, like the 1,000, is just a drop in the bucket for a lot of people. And you can be taking, like, I've got mum on 10,000 IUs. That's anti-cancer, that's brain function, that's immune function, that's all of those sorts of things, especially in winter. She's on 10,000, and even in the summer, because she doesn't get a lot of skin exposure, you know, because she wears long trousers and, you know, won't go out in her shorts at 80. So yeah, I think there's a little bit more to that whole problem. And then Māori.
Oh yeah.
I mean, I've done my genetics. I'm very poor vitamin D activator and transporter and receptor. So I take the 10,000 I use a day.
Yeah.
You know, so it's understanding these things. And how does that play in the brain? What is it actually doing in the brain, the vitamin D there?
So there are millions of vitamin D receptors on neurons. and it locks in and sends a message to the what we call epigenetic message to the DNA to turn on what we call synoblasty, so the creation of new neurons.
Wow.
And help to reduce inflammation. And then there's a whole lot of unknowns as to how it works. In fact, Dale probably would have been able to answer that better at molecular structure. Because that's the domain of neuroscientists.
Neuroscientists.
We can tell from the epidemiology that when you're low in vitamin D, yes, like you say, there's a myriad of diseases that are much more common, including a lot of the common cancers, including diabetes.
Wow.
So part of our pilot, we did measure vitamin D, and we had trouble measuring it. The labs don't want to do it. And which is just crazy. And you have to pay, if they will do it, you have to pay $35.
Yep. Which for some people is a you can't, if you don't have the money,
on top of everything else you're paying for.
Exactly.
So anyway, we did find vitamin D deficiency in our Maori population, no surprise. And so they have to get out there and really, and for them it's even harder, as you know, to get enough ultraviolet to convert.
Yeah, because our brown and darker skin inhibits that. Yeah. And this is why, like if and even in the recent pandemic, wouldn't it have been great if the government had gone, hey, everybody, get on vitamin D and here's some vitamin D.
Yes.
Hand it out, test people's levels, get them checked, get them up there, because that is one of the things that's easy, simple, doesn't cost a heck of a lot of money.
Yeah, I was asked to give a presentation to a large corporate, and the question was, what is the single most cost-effective thing we can do to help our people through winter? And it was vitamin D. Yeah. Because you drop your viral infections down by 40%.
Wow.
And your absenteeism from viral infections. And so how simple, I was encouraging the company, get people tested, and instead of wine gums and chocolates in your cafeteria, provide vitamin D.
Exactly. Yeah, this is gold. Love it. Yeah. And it's just so simple. And it's a trophic support too, because that's one of the other things that goes south when you've got Alzheimer's, is some of the trophic, some of the hormonal support systems. Can you talk to anything? That's a little bit more complicated, obviously.
It is. So they get, what I said was like the synoblasty. So that's trophic support, the ability of the brain to create new neuronal outreaches to talk to the next neighboring brain cell. That synapse where the neurotransmitters are converting over and giving them, help to create new memories. That needs trophic support. And that's hormones, amongst other things, and the vitamin D. That's how it acts as it's called a neuropeptide. So that's one of the things that it's doing, is supporting the development of new brain cells. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And like with the cases that you published with, I think there were 10 cases that you were involved in that study. That was, worldwide publication, 100 people who reversed Alzheimer's with Dr. Dale, and you and Mickey were involved with 10 of those cases, which is pretty impressive. Well done. What were some of the results that you saw, like people's lives changed, So for someone who's sitting out there now, who's got a mum, a dad, a brother, a sister, someone who's just been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, what would you say to them? Like, can you give us some experience there on what can be done, and what you've seen, what you've actually seen?
So the first thing is, get it early. So when someone's diagnosed with Alzheimer's, if you take detailed history, on average, the family, beyond the person themselves, the family noticed something 4 years beforehand. Okay. So you have a 4-year window. So when mum starts repeating herself in the same conversation, or she got lost once in a car park at the supermarket, which we can all do, but when you add it up, get very suspicious that there's something going on and get tested. That's the whole thing. What what we find is when we do test, we find a myriad of problems always. Okay.
Yeah, all of us would have something.
Whether it's the vitamin D, the low zinc, the poor gut, and on and on and on, we always find a series of things. And the good news is most of them are correctable. The tougher ones, we can improve upon.
The mercury.
And as Dale says, we've got to just get the seesaw tilting back for the brain to start, take the toxicity away, support the trophic, the support of the brain cells, and you can get reversals. So the number one thing was get tested early. We get better response with people if we get them early in the mild cognitive impairment response. That's consistent with every other practitioner I've ever talked to, and Dale. So get it early. Don't wait around. And if your doctor says there's nothing that can be done, don't accept that. Don't accept that. Read, learn, empower yourself. Get Dale's book, and then get tested. And it is complex. There's no doubt about that. So it takes a commitment. You have to gather what support you've got around you, the family. The ones that have done the best in our experience are they have a strong family support. The kids are on board, the partner's on board. They're all helping each other to achieve, just the testing is quite onerous. You got to do a urine test for a series of blood tests, you got a vision test on the computer screen, you got a cognitive test. So you have to, make a commitment, get tested, find a practitioner, and I'm not self-promoting here, but I think there are 2 or 3, and that's a problem we can talk about because it is a complex. There's quite a few practitioners have trained, but now they don't want to do it. Yeah, it's too much. Yeah. So we found that it was best to be dedicated. So we have a dedicated Alzheimer's program that we've worked out over the years. We have systems in place, and we warn people, look, this is what it will take. And it will take a large commitment of time, effort, and money, unfortunately, because the tests are expensive and they're only getting more and more expensive. But for us to be able to help someone, we need to know, do they have leaky gut? Do they have high mercury? How can we target and personalize a program without knowing those facts? So unfortunately, it is getting down to people who have very good support from partners and family and friends, a good doctor who's well trained and experienced, and enough money to be able to, the big things the things that make a big difference, a lot of them don't cost a lot of money. The keto diet, intermittent fasting, doing more exercise and brain training, those things are fundamental to good brain health.
And so that's maybe where people need to start, because if they're listening to this and they don't have the money and they don't have the resources, this is what you can do now, and it will make a big, you might get more if you're working, you will get more if you're working with a good practitioner and you're able to get all of that, and we can get much more nuanced. But if you are listening and you don't have the resources, start with the diet, start with the exercise, start with cold water therapies and, saunas if you can get into them, or hot water, baths, and everything that is going to support that detoxification process, everything that's going to support a healthy diet and metabolic health. Those are the places that we can start. And vitamin D's and zinc. Zinc is another one. Explain actually why is zinc important?
Well, what's interesting, and a lot of even neurologists don't know this, the area in the body that has the highest concentration of zinc is the hippocampus, right in here.
Wow.
And it's the area that is very important in the creation of memories. It's the area that we see start to shrink, usually first. And when you get the volume on the MRI scans, the hippocampus has shrunk on a lot of these patients. And that's just brain cells dying, right? It's just shrinking. And zinc is there, essential for the creation of new memories. Absolutely essential.
Wow. Okay.
And the problem is that a lot of people have the APO4 gene.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that makes them, more likely to get Alzheimer's. That impacts the absorption of zinc.
Oh, is
in
that
the
one
gut.
of the mechanisms of why that's
Yes.
a problem, the
Yes,
APOE4?
and then they have higher copper levels often, and that impedes the zinc. So it's actually the zinc copper ratio that's important.
Yep.
So we found, I had a patient the other day, and even within general practice, just if I do have someone who's super motivated, we checked her zinc levels out. She's got mild cognitive impairment. She had pre-diabetes. She's reversed it on
Brilliant.
the keto. She's making ketones again.
Mm-hmm.
And we've got her brain training, and she doesn't have much money. And so we said, well, let's do these basic things. She was super keen, but yeah, so I've just put her on zinc, and I can, prescribe zinc for her. And so the basic things are the exercises, really probably the number one thing. If we look at the risk factors, the things that you can do, when they did a study on super athletes, it's very rare for a super athlete to get Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
Very rare.
We got blood flow. We got oxygen, blood flow.
Yeah, that's the number one thing. If you've got a bad family history of Alzheimer's, you may have done the gene, you've got APO4, be the fittest you can be. Number one thing. Then you're not going to be, the chances are, you can't be the fittest you can be without being obese. So you're going to be slim. Your blood pressure is probably going to be under good control. Your blood lipids are going to be good. You're fit. You're healthy. You're energized, and your chances of Alzheimer's are very slim. They're still there, but then if you add on top of that some basic testings, because that person, the only way they could really get into trouble is if they've got high toxins. They could have a mold illness.
Yeah.
Very high mercury.
What test do you use to do mold assessment? For a toxicity panel. Which one do you use?
Right. So we're looking for a condition called CIRS, C-I-R-S, which stands for chronic inflammatory response syndrome.
Mm-hmm.
It's a syndrome that's now well described, interestingly enough, well accepted by the Australian government, who just did a huge, a couple of years ago now, they did an investigation and they asked, is this mold illness real?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not only mold, Lyme disease can cause it as well. So it's the body's overreaction to a couple of toxins, or in Lyme disease, an infection. But a mold, it's the mycotoxins, minute. It's not mold, it's the toxins inside the mold.
Mm-hmm.
And they are released into the atmosphere. We breathe them in.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're genetically vulnerable, you will create this huge inflammatory response.
Yep.
So when we're measuring it, we're measuring for mycotoxins in the urine, and we're also looking for that inflammatory marker. Okay. So we get the mold, we confirm the mold in the urine, we confirm they've over-responded, and then we do a thing called a visual contrast sensitivity test, which is a useful test, which is really just detecting the shades of gray, because the toxins and the inflammation in the back of the eye and the retina impact the ability to detect visual contrast, shades of gray. If people want to do this test, they can at home. Just go, I think it's just VCS, but just go visual contrast sensitivity test, Google that. There's a free one you can do online. You got to set your computer up and be a certain distance from it.
Yep.
It pays to spend, I think it's $15 or $25 and do the paid version, because they'll send you a report. and they'll analyze your results.
Wow.
And it'll tell you whether they think you're at risk of SIRS or whether you've got toxins.
Crikey, that's a brilliant thing, and you know,
Yeah, it's a
relatively
good
cheap, I think.
screening device. If someone's going, you know, I wonder if I've got mold illness. I have got a bit
That's
of mold,
Yeah.
and my brain's not working very well. People with mold illness have a different way of presenting. Their symptoms are often executive function, meaning they're having trouble planning and, you know, using this front part of the brain.
Yep.
Sometimes their memory to begin with is okay, but they get confused and overwhelmed with complex tasks and with planning.
Okay.
So I had one of those 10 cases was a woman in Christchurch. She was just 58. She was had a big job as a project manager for the health board down there. She was running various projects. Her job was planning.
God.
And she said to me, you know, my memory's okay, but these things have been happening, and I got very suspicious. And it's often just after menopause in women.
Yep.
And
So
after there's been some stressful episode has somehow precipitated it. It could be lose a spouse or a job, or lose your house falling down a cliff from too many rains. It's usually a stressful situation in the mid-50s, this executive function rather than memory loss, it will go on to get memory loss. Our last patient with SIRS presented with epilepsy. So the wife actually, and vague thinking, very smart man, just couldn't get his thinking together. He would describe it as, I just can't think. Was orientated, had reasonable memory, but just couldn't think, solve problems, and plan. And he was fitting in the night. His wife sent me a video of him fitting, and the neurologist couldn't explain it. He'd seen several neurologists. They accepted they'd be put on anti-epileptic medication. Oh God! But he responded very well to program, and he's no longer having epilepsy, and his mind is cleared.
Keto diet would have helped.
And yeah, he had toxins and various other things, but his main thing was mold. They had to do. Fortunately, they could afford it. They had to completely renovate their house, get rid of the mold, bring in expensive filters. Yeah. But they did it all. Had a very supportive partner. They did it all, and he started to come right. Wow. And you could see his visual contrast sensitivity started to improve.
Wow, that's
amazing. You can
amazing.
see it in the tests. You see.
And is there any sort of protocols that you use to get mold out of the body? Because mold's an area I haven't dived into in my practice. So there's specific ways of getting rid of mold. But the first thing we say to people, what's the point? Here's your urine mycotoxin level. It's through the roof. Here's your inflammatory markers through the roof. You've got SIRS by diagnosis, by criteria. The first thing is to stop exposure. Yeah, you can't.
And that's the hardest thing. We've got someone at the moment. He's got 2 houses. He's got a reasonable amount of money. Very smart man. He's only in his 50s, late 50s. And we keep saying to him, you're not going to improve until you get out of that house. They had a massive leak. They've only got a little bit of visible mold, and that's the other thing. It doesn't just, if you don't have visible mold, doesn't mean you don't have mycotoxins in your house.
No.
In fact, the majority of cases, you don't. But when we do mold swabbing of your house, you've got a lot there. Wow. So we use a different. So that's the first thing. You have to reduce your exposure. And, you know, we've had people who've had to sell up their houses and move houses. There are many stories of people living in camper vans and in tents until they can find a place that doesn't have high levels of mold. And then there are filters that you can get for your house that will suck up some of the mold and dehumidify your house, of course.
Yep.
And then when it comes to the body, there are clay-like substances and zeolite substances that will bind the mycotoxins.
So bentonite, clay, and
Yes,
zeolite, and
zeolite.
charcoal.
But again, just swallowing zeolite's not going to work.
Yeah.
You have to have a dedicated protocol.
Yeah.
The other thing that helps is a thing called Dr. YU, and there's a YouTube on this, Dr. Yu's sauna protocol. Using near infrared sauna, taking some, what you do is take some niacin.
Yep.
To enough to give you some flushing.
Yeah.
And you've got to start small. I warn people with that dose.
I've done that wrong before.
Yeah, then until you feel a little bit of flushing.
Yeah.
And then you do some vigorous exercise.
Yeah.
Get yourself in front of a near infrared sauna, a portable one. I've got one here.
Yep.
I've actually had mold illness myself.
Oh, wow.
My mycotoxins were through the roof, and we had lived in a moldy home, and we had to get out.
Yep.
You know, in fact, we've moved twice because the next house turned out the next set of rains was leaky, so we got out of that.
And now your house is falling down the hill. God.
Yeah, now the house is falling down. Then we finally get into a mold-free house.
Oh dear.
Falling down the hill from rains.
Oh God.
So yeah, you have to reduce your exposure, and because the mycotoxins are recycling. What they do is they store in the fat, and they're constantly recycling. They go in through your blood, into your bile, into your gut, get reabsorbed, recycled, get put back into areas of fat. Your fat and the brain is fat.
Brain.
So you have to capture them as they're going through the gut. So there is actually an old-fashioned drug, cholestyramine, that we sometimes use, but mainly it's bentonite clay and the zeolites and charcoal, activated charcoal.
Yep.
So the Dr. Yu's protocol is niacin, exercise, sauna, and a binder, charcoal afterwards, because you'll also sweat out the toxins in your sweat.
Yep.
So when you're having a near infrared sauna, the red light is releasing the toxin and the mercury. It'll penetrate into your fat layer and release it, and those toxins will find their way into the gut. So then you bind them with the mycotoxins. You bind them with the charcoal.
It's a set
protocol that's it's been quite well proven. They did tests on poor old Iraqi soldiers coming back, and they took fat biopsies, and then they ran a whole series of detox protocols, and they found this one was the most effective.
Dr. Yu's. I'll have a look at that.
Yeah, there's a YouTube on Dr. Yu's detox protocol. They'll find that goes through the whole thing of how to do it.
Wow, that's gold, actually, Dave. Wow, we've gone all over the show. I'm going to have to wrap it up and do a part 2, I think, because we haven't got to some of the juicy parts. But this has been very valuable. So the takeaways from today, just to wrap it up, the mold thing, I think that's a huge thing that people are probably not even on their radar. So go and do that test, that visual test, and then have a look at Dr. Yu's detox protocols, because that's quite, sauna's maybe the difficult piece there, but the other things, the niacin, the exercise, the bentonite clay, they're all pretty accessible. And then the trophic factors, and we didn't get onto hormones, because hormones play a big role in the brain as well, and supporting brain function. Maybe we can do that in part 2. But and then when we talked about the keto diet, and not the bodybuilder type of keto where you're pounding bacon and butter and cream every day, more the, what did you call it, the
flexitarian, meaning
ketotarian. I love that. Ketotarian.
Lots of vegetables growing above the ground.
Ketotarian, vegetables above the ground, lots of leafy greens, alongside small, good portions of quality protein and some good oils, basically, getting rid of the process, getting rid of the grains when possible, getting rid of the carbs, the higher carb foods, and easing your way into that and to understanding these processes. And then we also talked about the insulin resistance and what's actually happening there in the body and in the brain. and and some of the problems that we've got in the system of how and why we're not picking this up and why we're not doing something. So Dave, this has been absolutely, astounding. And I just, want to say amazing work on that Surfaid International and the work that you've done there. You're a true humanitarian, a true altruistic person who's really, in the trenches doing the hard work. And now with the iwis over there, working and changing lives and reversing diabetes and slowing Alzheimer's and reversing Alzheimer's, all this is absolutely impacting people's lives massively, but you're one of the workers in the trenches, no one's probably
like that sometimes.
But these are the people, in my opinion, that should be getting the dames and the sirs and the things, the accolades, and unfortunately that doesn't usually happen. It goes to the more high profile people, but you definitely one of those people that deserves all those types of things. But so thanks for sharing your experience today.
You're welcome.
Yeah, and I really hope that this is going to be okay and that things come right for you there, because that's the last thing you need on your plate. And I'd love to do another session, and finish the story on what else can we do? What else can we do? And what can we do at home when we don't have the practitioners? Because there is a lack. There's a lack of people that are doing the full Alzheimer's protocols and Bredeson protocols, and there's but there are things that we can do even if we don't have access to yourself or to Dale, but if people do want to reach out and do want to work with you, are you able to take any? Have you got bandwidth for taking people on?
We do. It's limited, but we do. Our website's revitahealth.co.nz, REVITA health.co.nz. And so they can send us an email that way.
Brilliant. So if you're wanting to work with Dr. Dave and Mickey, that would be the best place to reach out to. Get in quick, I'd say, before you run out of bandwidth. This is the problem I have. Like I work with lots of doctors and people all around the planet with different things, with cancers and Alzheimer's and things and brains. And each one of them just hits the roof in their the bandwidth, and the scalability of these things is the hardest thing, because it takes behavioral change, and even in my own practice with what I do, I hit the ceiling constantly. There's constantly a waiting list, there's constantly there's just not enough of you to go around to be able to actually make the big enough impact. I can share the knowledge, but this is why these platforms and podcasts are great, because at least people get to start researching themselves and start to take control and the more they listen, the more they learn, the more they are able to take some action themselves, so that's really powerful. So thanks, Dave, for your time today.
Key message is Alzheimer's and many of the other dementias are largely, I would say, not totally, largely reversible and largely preventable, even better still, especially if you've got a strong family history. And so let's structure a bit more structured the next podcast about what someone can do if they've got a family history of Alzheimer's or dementia.
That's what we'll do. So we have a bit more structure and don't end up in 10 rabbit holes.
We'll plot it out.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thanks, Dr. Dave, for your time today. It's been absolutely fabulous.
You're welcome. All right. Bye-bye.